Kevork Almassian, who is an Armenian Syrian, who is the founder of Syriana Analysis, a political commentator and an expert in Syrian affairs. Kevork, thanks for joining us on the Mother of All talk shows. I just wanted to make some comparisons. The NATO powers have been starving the people of Syria for a decade. They have regularly bombarded it with cruise missiles. In fact, the only time the American media was in love with Donald Trump was when he was firing what they almost orgasmically described as his beautiful weapons, raining down on Syrian cities. And of course, America's main ally, Israel, bombs Syria at will, usually in the middle of the night, and nobody cares about it. Nobody does anything about it. The NATO powers have bankrolled and weaponized and propagandized for the worst people in all humanity. The throat-cutting, head-chopping alphabet soup of Islamist extremism that tore Syria to pieces. You must see all this as a bit hard to take, all this coverage of Ukraine.
George, thank you very much, first of all, for having me on your show. It's really a pleasure. To be honest, I'm not surprised at all with the hypocrisy and the double standards of the Western corporate mainstream media. And that is why for almost a decade, me and other people, we are working independently on social media outlets in order to shed the light on the other side of the story, whether it's in Syria, whether it's Ukraine, and I also do work on Armenia and Azerbaijan conflict and Palestine and other regional files, right? However, we have to always follow the money. Where's the money coming from for these media outlets? For example, in Germany, we have these state-funded media and also some media outlets that are also funded by millionaires or some political parties, right? So each side has its own political interests. So in my opinion, we shouldn't expect much from the Western mainstream media outlets. They will never change a course. They will always have their, as you mentioned, fantasies about destroying, what do they call third world countries? Or recently, they are calling us uncivilized countries. And ironically enough, I am one of the people who fled Syria in 2015, when half of my city, Aleppo, was occupied by Al-Qaeda, Al-Nusra Front. They tried to snipe me twice, and they kidnapped my brother. So for them, I am the uncivilized person, right? And comparing to the new refugees that are coming from Ukraine, and I'm not seeing anything negative about the refugees. All the refugees, especially nowadays from Ukraine, whether they are fleeing to Russia or fleeing to the other European countries, they deserve protection. However, this racist approach that the media now adopted regarding the refugee crisis in Ukraine, it has goals. They want to achieve some goals, right? The first goal is to convince the European public that, look, guys, these are Europeans with blue eyes and blonde hair, so they are civilized. They are different from the uncivilized people like myself, that I came from the Middle East. So we have to accept a few 100,000 refugees because of the, especially in Germany, there was a blowback or increase of populism in Germany and other European countries after the refugee crisis, right? And the second goal is they are trying to mobilize the ultranationalists in Europe by adopting this racist approach, because they want to convince or urge some brainless people here in Europe, those who are very radical, to go and fight in Ukraine. And those who are going and will fight in Ukraine are going to fight against the Russians, of course. And in my opinion, the European political elite, they don't really care at the moment if these ultranationalists or neo-Nazis are going to Ukraine to fight against the Russians. They only care about repelling the Russian attack on Ukraine and make a quagmire for Russians in Ukraine in order to bring a resistance like they did in Afghanistan. And this could lead into years of infighting there. And this is not in the interest of Russia. Russia wants to finish these operations quickly. However, the European Union and the Americans, they know that by supporting these ultra-nationalists, and especially there are neo-Nazi brigades in Ukraine, they will create a situation where Russia is stuck there for years, and this will exhaust the economy of Russia, and it could bring the end of the Russian dream to become a Eurasian power again, because all this conflict in Ukraine is, just put everything the media is telling you in the recycle bin. It's just like, it's like rubbish. Everything is happening in Ukraine is in order to block the Russian access into the into Eurasia, because without Ukraine, Russia becomes a regional Asian power. And this is well illustrated by Brzezinski in his book, The Grand Chessboard. Therefore, their priority is to keep Russia as a regional Asian country and to cut all the aspirations or block all the aspirations of whether it's Putin or not Putin to become a superpower again. Unfortunately for the NATO countries, they cannot accept Russia to be a partner. They are so arrogant that they don't accept China, Russia, and other increasing or growing powers to become part of the international community. They want to keep controlling the resources of the world, number one, and also the decision-making of the international system.
Quite so, I'm sure. Let's talk about Germany, if we can. Let me get this right. Germans are being encouraged to arm themselves much more heavily than they have ever been before and march through Poland to fight Russians. What could possibly go wrong with that? What happened in Germany, even in the last week? Because it's only 10 days ago that Russia was being routinely attacked in other Western media for not allowing weapons to go from, not only from its own country, but not even allowing other countries to fly over Germany to deliver weapons. It sent helmets. Now it's just sent thousands of Stinger missiles. Again, I say, what could possibly go wrong? But what happened in Germany to change the state's position?
George, for 16 years under the reign of Angela Merkel, although Merkel was heavily embedded with NATO, but at the same time, she never pursued a hostile policy into this extent against Russia, right? She was trying to balance the relationship with Moscow because of the national interest of the German people, especially when it comes to the energy sector, right? Now, in Germany, you have a new coalition. The Social Democrats and the Greens are more NATO than the NATO itself. It's ironic, like just 2 decades ago, the Greens were lobbying against the NATO, and now they are like incredibly warmongers in Germany, and they call themselves the Greens. This is very unfortunate situation. Funny enough, the only political party that has made clear that they don't want to send weapons to Ukraine or urge as I mentioned, the brainless people, these radical ultranationalists, to go to Ukraine is the opposition party Alternative for Germany, that is a far-right party. Even the left party in Germany, they are divided and they are condemning clearly and only Russia without giving any context to this conflict. And I'm saying this with a pain in my chest, because I was born and raised in a left-wing family, and I don't find myself a place here in the left-wing scene in Germany, because most of them have become imperialists more than the imperialists themselves. Now, by sending weapons and ammunition and all these stingers into Ukraine, as I mentioned, it will not only create a quagmire, but it will create a nest for the radical fascists, to the neo-Nazis, to march from Europe into Ukraine. They did similar mistake in Afghanistan in late 70s and early 80s. They armed the Mujahideen. And then they did similar mistake in Syria. They armed the Mujahideen. And we can see now Idlib is the largest safe haven for Al-Qaeda terrorists in the entire world. And two of the last ISIS leaders were hiding in Idlib. And until this moment, Germany is sending money to Idlib. And they say it's humanitarian help. They're sending to the so-called white helmets, etc. And we all know how this money could be robbed by the radicals, because every time the Europeans or the Americans were sending weapons to the so-called moderate rebels, the Free Syrian Army, the weapons were ending in the hands of ISIS and Al-Qaeda. They were either selling them to these two terrorist groups, or these terrorist groups, because they are the most powerful groups in Syria, they were taking over these weapons. And the same thing could happen in Ukraine, because Azov and the national militia and other neo-Nazi groups, they are very strong. Let's remember in 2014, when the Russian-backed separatists, they were advancing from Donetsk, they were pushed back by the neo-Nazis. And the Ukrainian army collapsed in 2014 in the southern part of Ukraine, and they were the neo-Nazis who pushed back the Russian-backed separatists. And between 2014 and 2019 exactly, if you go to the German media, you will see lots of video reportages about the neo-Nazis, and they're calling them neo-Nazis, right? But now, in 2022, when the war erupted, they're calling this a conspiracy theory or a Russian misinformation campaign.
Well, I've actually, Kevork, I've got all of those front pages and all of those features on my telephone. The New York Times, The Guardian, The Times, The Sunday Times, The Daily Mail, the German press, the Canadian press. Over the last 8 years, all of these outlets have explicitly covered what they call, not me, they call neo-Nazi, far-right, extreme-right organizations. Now, if you put up a picture of these groups holding their swastikas on Facebook, you'll be banned.
Yes.
It's unbelievable what has happened. Amazon, apparently, is selling online the merchandise of the Azov battalion, named by every one of those publications and media houses that I have just adumbrated as a Nazi organization. You can sit at home and shop on Amazon buying the insignia, the merchandise of a Nazi organization. Has the world gone mad?
George, the founder of the neo-Nazi group Azov in, I think it was in 1999 or 2000, he said clearly that the mission of Azov is to wage the last crusade war by collecting the white people. I'm paraphrasing him. He wants to wage a white crusader war against the Semite-led international community. Also, they are. It's not only racist. They are using the same literature of Hitler, and by doing so, you know, the ideologies during war times are very important. And what made ISIS and Al-Qaeda, for example, persist in their war is their ideology, because they believe in a grand cause. And they also believe in a grand cause, these neo-Nazis. And they will be the ones who will fight till the end against the Russians. So we may see the collapse of the Ukrainian army again. And let's remember, the neo-Nazis are embedded with the Ukrainian army. They're not like separate militia that they're fighting separately. No, they're fighting together. In 2015, I was in Donetsk, and the neo-Nazi groups and the Ukrainian army, they were jointly bombing the hell out of Donetsk. The only place that was safe in Donetsk in 2015, I remember, was the hotel that we were staying in, because it was a hotel dedicated for the journalists, and it was the place that they were not bombing. So for 8 years, the neo-Nazis and the Ukrainian army were bombing Donetsk and Lugansk regions, like Donbass. Over 13,000 people died. I haven't seen a single person changing his social media profile photo into "I stand with Donbass" or "I stand with the people there." They were targeted because they are ethnic Russians or because they speak Russian. It's blatant racism against the people there. I received lots of messages by people in Donetsk and Lugansk and by people who are half Russian and half Ukrainian. And they say after the revolution or the so-called revolution in Ukraine, we cannot speak freely that we are Russian, or we can't even speak Russian freely in the streets because we're being harassed, we're being targeted by the neo-Nazis. And not only that, the government in Ukraine is regulating new laws and regulations against them, depriving them their right to speak their language, depriving them from their political parties, etc. So this is a state-sponsored fascism in Ukraine. And unfortunately, the so-called civilized world is now siding with this government. And look, George, I'm not making any excuses for the Russian invasion. I would call it an invasion. I would call it against international law. But at the same time, it's not unprovoked. Those who say it is just an unprovoked attack that Putin just woke up in the morning and decided to attack Ukraine, they're crazy. They're trying to simplify political affairs into extent that they think we are sheep because they want to portray things white and black. No. Russia deserves to be respected, and they should respect its national security. And that means NATO should stop its entrenchment into the east on the borders with Russia, and they should sign on a security deal that respects the national security of Russia, and Russia should respect the territorial integrity of its neighboring countries, and that's how you can create a regional and lasting peace. But NATO is, till the moment they insist to enlarge, I mean, what do you expect from a president like Putin or any other president? Let's suppose Russia is installing his missiles again in Cuba or in Canada. The United States will invade this country in a matter of minutes. And all these people that are now peace-loving people that they claim themselves, they will be with the United States. So for me, they are not humanitarian activists. They are political activists wearing this jacket of the humanitarian.
Some of them are just fools that might eventually see the light. Kevork, it's been wonderful talking to you. You're some talker, I must say. Well done for coming on the mother of all talk shows.